Have you ever experienced something that completely transformed your life? I'm Hudson, and my story is one of love, betrayal, and the life-altering consequences of a wrong choice. It's about a man who had everything and lost it all due to one mistake. I grew up in a normal family with an older brother named Jackson. We lost our father in a car accident during our childhood and lived with our mother. Besides being a brother, Jackson also took on the role of a father. He was 8 years older than me and always looked after my mother and me. Due to our family circumstances, he didn't want to marry, believing his duty was to care for us. However, when he reached his 30s, he agreed to marry at our mother's urging. After going to several matchmaking events, he liked Alice and they got married. At that time, I was 22 years old and quite reckless. I was a mechanical engineering student and many girls were interested in me, but then I saw Alice's sister, Gemma, and fell deeply in love with her. Impatiently and eagerly, I told my brother that we had to become brothers-in-law at any cost. Jackson, hearing this, smiled and said, "Why are you in such a hurry? Let me set up a business for you first, then I will help you to stand on your own feet and marry the girl you like." He calmed me down with these words, and since Alice knew about my interest in her sister, we developed a closer relationship. I often went to Jackson's house, and Gemma would come there too, coordinating with Alice, and we would easily converse. My brother knew I visited his house, but he was unaware of his sister-in-law's presence. One day, he unexpectedly came home while Alice was out shopping, and I was alone with Gemma. Jackson, being a devout man, was deeply upset and said, "Brother, you and Gemma aren't married, and it's not right for you to be alone together in a secluded place. Besides, I promise to help you as much as I can." He also mentioned his dissatisfaction with Alice and her family, considering them to be quite liberal and having already encountered ideological differences with Alice. "So, you can find a more suitable wife with careful thought and consultation," he advised. That day, I left Jackson's house in shame and returned to our home. Unfortunately, my secret meetings with Gemma continued, encouraged by my sister-in-law. After our father's death, Jackson took on the role of head of the family. He sacrificed his share of the inheritance and sold his car to set up a respectable shop for me, where I worked with pride and dignity. Although I spent most of my time at work, I had less opportunity to see Gemma, and Alice was unhappy about this. So, one day, she came to my shop with a plan for Gemma and me to see each other every day. Using the excuse of being bored at home, Alice convinced my brother to let her work at my shop, and Jackson agreed. Thus, I became Alice's co-worker, and her sister would visit us daily. About 2 months passed, and I noticed that Jackson and Alice were having serious disputes over ideological issues, and their relationship deteriorated into quarrels and disputes. My brother told me his wife was secretly involved with a young man they had both been interested in before, and within a few months, their relationship deteriorated into quarrels and emotional separation. During the time Alice went to her father's house, I was the only link between her and my brother. Unfortunately, this treacherous woman, with her seductive looks, gradually trampled over my emotions. She praised me and said she wished she had married me instead of Jackson. At first, these words made me angry, and I felt like a betrayer. Alice deceived me with her words and flirtatious looks, and before I realized, I had become a prisoner of my vile desires. A year passed, and Jackson, unable to find a way to save his marriage even with the mediation of respected family elders, divorced Alice by mutual agreement. He even gave her the small apartment he had bought with great difficulty as part of her dowry. Just when my brother needed deep emotional and moral support, I, indebted to this great man for his selfless love and effort in setting up my shop, fell for the devilish eyes of his wife. I became captivated by a look that forever cast my gaze to the ground in shame. After Jackson divorced Alice, he immersed himself in books and decided to continue his studies. I felt deeply for my brother, so I broke off my relationship with Gemma, Alice's sister. But it hadn't even been a month before I realized Alice was keeping an eye on me by passing by my shop. One day, feeling a sense of disdain towards her, I stepped out of the shop to confront her with harsh words, and I did just that. "Alice," hearing my words, burst into tears and came into my shop. While she looked into my eyes, she confided in me a bit. No matter how much I tried to look down and avoid her gaze, I couldn't control the wild horse of my vile desires, and unfortunately, I ended up talking with Alice for an hour or two that day. She influenced me more with her provocative gaze than her words, to the point where I abandoned reason and logic. From that day on, my emotional relationship with Alice deepened, to the extent that after about 6 months, we decided to marry. I wore a groom's suit without my family's consent and married her. The day Jackson married Alice, I never imagined that one day she would become my wife. Alice insisted that Jackson and my mother should know about our marriage, but I still wasn't ready to face Jackson and tell him that his former wife was now mine. Wait! Before you continue the video, I want to invite you to a challenge. If you were in Hudson's place, what would you have done? Write in the comments and hit like right now, share your thoughts with us. I'm waiting for your amazing ideas. Unfortunately, when my desires subsided, the ugliness and filthiness of my actions became apparent, and I saw the devilish side of Alice. 1 month had passed since our wedding when one day, Jackson suddenly visited my shop. I quickly messaged Alice, warning her that Jackson was here and that she should not come by under any circumstances, not wanting her to be seen. She didn't reply, and I was relieved, thinking she would heed my warning. While I was talking with Jackson, suddenly the door of the shop opened and Alice entered, looking as if she was dressed for a wedding. Jackson's face instantly turned red with anger as he yelled, "What are you doing here?" I was on the verge of a breakdown, silently signaling Alice from behind Jackson, pleading her not to mention our marriage. However, it seemed Alice had come exactly for this purpose. She turned to Jackson, showed off her wedding ring, and said, "There's no harm in talking to your brother's wife like this, right?" The atmosphere was filled with a heavy silence. I watched Alice's bold move and looked at Jackson, every moment expecting him to confront me. But with a strained voice, he asked, "What is she talking about?" I was overwhelmed with shame, unable to utter a word, cursing myself for what I had done to my brother. Jackson still seemed to be waiting for my denial, as if he couldn't believe it. Then Alice dealt the next blow, saying, "Why are you so stunned? Did we commit a crime? We fell in love with each other, and instead of wearing that sorrowful look, go and give the good news to our mother." Both Jackson and I stared at Alice in shock, as if it was a theatrical scene, and Alice was deeply immersed in her role. Unable to remain silent any longer, I managed to utter, "What?" Alice approached me with her usual coquetry and said, "I wanted to surprise you tonight, darling, you are going to be a father." Alice grabbed my arm, showing fake excitement. Honestly, I wasn't happy at all, feeling embarrassed because of Jackson. I yanked my arm away from her, as if suddenly realizing the truth. Jackson composed himself and said, "I told you I had your back and would find a suitable wife for you. Were there really no other girls in the world that you had to step over your brother's dignity?" He left the shop without another word. I wished he had hit me or cursed me, but his silence inflicted a torment 100 times worse. I looked at Alice. Her face, adorned with a devilish smile, made me shudder. After Jackson left, I was drenched in the sweat of shame. Alice said, "Oh, what's the matter?" Eventually, you had to know. It's better I told you. Otherwise, you wouldn't have realized our child was on the way. Angrily, I looked at Alice, hands on her hips, standing self-righteously, and said, "Lower your voice. You were wrong to come here without my permission. If anything happens to my brother or mother because of this, I'll never forgive myself. I made a mistake, and I regret it now." Alice's joyful expression quickly turned to one of anger and resentment. "When you were constantly at my door, you weren't sorry, huh? Mister, I am not a disposable tissue you can just throw away after use." I retorted, "Leave before I make you. We'll sort out the matter of this unwanted child later." She sneered, "The matter is clear. I'm keeping my child, and it's your duty to be a father, or I'll make your life miserable." After saying this, she left. My marriage to Alice had destroyed Jackson. Within a week, he transferred and moved to London with our mother. She didn't even bother to insult or belittle me. Their silence was worse than any curse. I was left with the house my brother had given to Alice as dowry and the shop he had helped me set up, starting a miserable life. I was determined to make Alice terminate the pregnancy, first gently and then with force and threats, but to no avail against a woman as tough as Alice. I had decided to part ways with Alice, but as long as she was pregnant, I couldn't divorce her. It was a vile bond that I had caused, and soon enough, I realized what a grave mistake and foolishness it had been. I don't know if you've ever experienced the most intense form of regret, but I lived through it in those days. I missed my mother and brother terribly and had no way to even call them. Alice's belly grew day by day, and her attitude worsened. I was always fleeing the house until I heard the baby's heartbeat. For the first time in a long time, sunlight shone on my cold, lifeless life. I tried to hide my guilt behind the newly found paternal feelings and set my life in order. I wanted our child to grow up in a warm and happy environment. Alice tried to bother me less and was busy shopping for baby items. It was a boy, exactly what I had always wished for. Finally, the day arrived, and our son was born. Seeing his innocent face cleared all the badness and sins from my heart. I wanted to be the best father I could be. The day we came home from the hospital, I longed to hear my mother's voice. It was selfish, but I wanted her comfort and to share the news of her becoming a grandmother. So, after much internal struggle, I called Jackson's phone. After a few rings, he answered, "Yes, may I help you?" I cleared my throat and said, "Hello, brother." He seemed surprised and was silent for a moment before responding, "Hello, Hudson, how are you?" I replied, "I'm good. I know you don't want to hear my voice, but I wanted to share the biggest event of my life with you." "Why would you think that?" "If I don't call, it's for your sake." "What happened?" I said sheepishly, "My son was born yesterday." Jackson's voice, slightly trembling, said, "Congratulations, little brother. I hope he grows up under your shadow." I thanked him and said, "Sorry to bother you. I wanted to talk to Mom, her phone was off." "Is she with you?" "Yes." The phone went silent for about 5 minutes. I could hear an argument in the background. Clearly, my mom had no desire to talk to me. Jackson's voice came again through the phone. He said, "Hudson, Mom is tied up. She'll talk to you another time." I knew I had overstepped by calling. I hadn't done anything praiseworthy, but I longed to hear at least my mom's voice and her blessings for my son to calm down a bit. I said goodbye and swallowed my lump. Days passed, and I was entangled in my life. Jimmy's arrival had brought excitement into our lives, although my relationship with Alice was still cold. I pretended for the sake of our child. A year after Jimmy's birth, I still hadn't managed to speak with my mom. Jackson, being a great man, had sent a coin to my store as a birthday gift for my son. His actions made me feel even more ashamed, but all I could do was feel remorse. The only thing that kept me home was Jimmy, who was getting cuter and sweeter by the day. One night, when I returned from work, I was busy with Jimmy when Alice's voice of protest reached my ears. "I am tired of your cold behavior. Can't you see we are husband and wife? Or am I just a tool for fatherhood? I'm human too, I have needs. If you continue this way, we'll end up separating." I responded emotionlessly, "Have you forgotten your actions? You know well I don't have feelings for you anymore. If you're upset, that's your problem. I am completely satisfied with my life." She smirked and said, "So, you are just like your brother, lacking manhood. Perhaps it's hereditary in your family." She hit a nerve. I felt the pulse of my temples throbbing. I put Jimmy's pacifier in his mouth and walked towards Alice. I grabbed her hair and said, "What nonsense are you spouting? Am I impotent? Then where did Jimmy come from? If you dare mention my brother again, I'll throw you out of this house." Alice, clearly frightened as it was the first time she saw me angry, said, "I didn't mean it. I miss you. Why don't you pay attention to me?" I couldn't bear to hear her voice anymore and stormed out of the house. I later realized those were the good days. Doubt, like a worm, had started eating away at me. Alice's words kept ringing in my ears, "You're just like your brother, impotent." What did she mean by that? The thought that suddenly crossed my mind disgusted me. Could it be that Jimmy? No, it's impossible. Jimmy is my flesh and blood. Alice, as bad as she is, wouldn't be that corrupt. Could it be that Jimmy? No, no way. Jimmy is my flesh and blood. Alice might be bad, but she's not that depraved. When I returned home, it was past midnight, and the house was engulfed in darkness. Quietly, I moved towards our bedroom. Alice and Jimmy were sleeping there. I stared at them for a moment, my throat tightening with emotion. My life was hellish, and the betrayal I committed against Jackson still felt insufficient. Since that night, Alice had instilled doubt and suspicion in my heart. I had become someone always waiting for her to make a mistake. One night, I pretended to sleep to see what Alice might do. She fumbled around the room and quickly left upon hearing her phone vibrate. Stealthily, I followed her to the hall and listened. She whispered, "No, he's asleep. That idiot hasn't left me a single day of happiness." What? No, that's too stupid. Tomorrow? I don't know. She giggled, her voice dripping with allure. "Let me see what I can do for you." Then she spoke softer. "I'll wait for you tomorrow at 2, kiss you, my dear." I quickly returned to bed, but my heart was about to explode with anger. Who was it? A man or a woman? If I confronted her now, she'd deny everything and twist the story. So, I decided to unexpectedly return home the next day to see what was really happening. When I reached home, I quietly inserted the key and entered. The sound of a man's laughter was the final blow. Alice was inappropriately close to another young man, laughing and chatting. I yelled, "What are you doing?" They both jumped in shock. My eyes bulged with fury, not understanding what was happening. I went to the kitchen and grabbed a knife. The man vanished in terror. Unable to control myself, I beat Alice and stabbed her, injuring her severely. She was on the brink of death, but survived thanks to doctors and filed a complaint against me. That's how I ended up behind bars. Alice even filed for divorce and pursued her alimony. I couldn't prove her infidelity, so I claimed the child wasn't mine to trap Alice. However, when the DNA test was conducted, it turned out Jimmy was indeed my son. Custody of Jimmy until the age of 7 fell to Alice. The news of my arrest reached Jackson and my mother through my uncle, and they came to my aid, restless and anxious. Jackson mortgaged our family home to secure my release from prison. I was freed and agreed to sell my shop to pay Alice's alimony. We went on a trip for a few days with Jackson and my mother, but every time I looked at their faces, I felt ashamed. That's why I wanted to commit suicide, but the moment I saw Jimmy's face in my mind, I regretted it and thought maybe there was still a chance to make up for some of the love and kindness my mother and Jackson showed me. So, I changed my mind, went to a counseling center, and sought help. Truly, one must be careful about what they set their eyes on, as many disasters in life stem from a devilish glance. It's been 4 years since my divorce, and I found out that Alice and Jimmy had illegally left the country. My heart aches for my son, but this is the price of my betrayal to my own blood, and I have to live with it for the rest of my life. I hope there comes a day when I can bring my son back to me. If you think your friends would enjoy these stories, be sure to share the videos with them. We are here on even-numbered days with new and exciting stories, joining you on this narrative journey, seeing what awaits us in life's twists and turns. Looking forward to seeing you in the upcoming videos.